Zen things.
No,
Do you know what I'm talking about?
no, I don't know what you're talking about.
All right, so they're like these little nicotine like pouches that people have. It's just like a pouch of like nicotine, and
Uh-huh.
so a lot of people who like vape have like transitioned over to doing these things.
I've transitioned over to this.
Okay, is it gum?
Yeah.
Yeah, nicotine. Yeah, they they've had like some studies come out, and it's like smokers were like the least influenced by COVID, and they attribute it to actually nicotine. Was nicotine like has this thing where it like blocks some receptors, and they found like some really like positive good effects from nicotine itself. Obviously, not the 400 other ingredients of cigarettes, like arsenic, formaldehyde,
Well,
and stuff, but the
nicotine
nicotine.
it does help you with focus, and they do consider it one of those
Yep.
nootropic.
Yeah, nootropic. Yeah.
Something. And another interesting thing about cigarettes or nicotine, tobacco, actually tobacco, the plant. So the Native Americans, they kind of introduced it to the world as we know it. And that plant is a sacred plant for them. It's a listening plant, and when you try and grow it in your garden, it will actually start moving and creeping closer to where people congregate because it likes to listen to conversations. So what they do is, as part of their rituals, they're gonna burn the tobacco, and they do it in different parts of the world as well, where you burn something like tobacco and it carries the prayers to heaven. And specifically, tobacco is a messenger from you to the Most High. And that's the history. Well, like, yeah, we've commercialized it and everything, and like, yeah, we can get addicted to a lot of good stuff, but I mean, this is more than um, tobacco as an addictive plant, you know. And I don't even think you need to inhale it. I think it just needs to be incinerated.
Yeah, it'll go through the bloodstream, even in your like under the smoke being in your
I don't
mouth.
even think it needs to go in the bloodstream. It's like a sage as well. Like it can just you just burn it, and then you apply conscious intention as you pray. Yeah.
So it's interesting that you started the conversation talking about like smoke going up to the Most High. I remember like Peterson
Well,
talking about like sacrifices and then burning the sacrifice. Why do you burn the sacrifice? Because the smoke goes up, and
mm.
so under the same kind of premise of what you're talking about with the tobacco,
Oh
is
yeah,
that
that's the same premise.
yeah,
Yeah, it's the same premise.
which is what we were kind of like what I wanted to kind of like hit on today, but I had you on podcast a long time ago. I feel like it's kind of unsanctimonious to just like dive in. So I do want to give like a little bit of intro. This is my good dear friend Johnny Ganta. We met in Dubai, and now he hails in the land of Bangalore, India, and is one of the people who owns real estate in my heart and doesn't pay rent, even though time, space, and matter are have us at literally as far away from each other as we can get without. If we start going any direction, we'll probably start coming back towards each other geographically. But I appreciate you hopping on and doing this, man.
Thanks for having me here, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here again. It's been many years.
Like I'd like to get like your take on some things because one of the things that we wanted to talk about was just like the difference between Western and Eastern mindset, a little bit around spirituality, but just like philosophy as well, and how we kind of view the world and the lens that we view the world through. And
Mm.
a big chunk of Americans, this is changing, but there's a period of time where like 85% of Americans didn't have passports. And which is kind of wild for people who reside in other parts of the world to kind of conceptualize that you're born here,
Mm.
you die there, you won't even probably leave the state that you're in. Now, this is changing.
Mm.
Ironically, last year, more people took vacations to Europe from America than ever before.
Mm.
So like we see like that trend changing, but there's a lot of propaganda pieces that people from the outside world will see where like people say America's the greatest country in the world, and this is being said by people who have never traveled to any other country, and so there comes this like sometimes narrow worldview, and you're not forced to be around other people with like different perspectives. I think like living for a short time in the UAE and then living in Europe and seeing like,
Oh,
oh, people are doing things completely differently than I would do that, but it's working.
mm,
And like having to like kind of
yeah, yeah.
reconcile that. And for you, it's kind of strange because you grew up outside of India. Big
Mm,
chunk of time you spent time in Canada, you spent time in the UAE, you spent some time in the States, and then there, a series of events, you end up back in India, and now you're like in a people group that maybe from the outside someone like, oh yeah, you're an Indian dude, but like you're a stranger in a strange land that's
mm,
somehow like home to you in a sense as well. So
mm.
yeah, maybe talk about what's that's been like of like because you kind of had both
Mhm.
worlds in that sense.
Yeah, I'm very much a bridge, I guess, in that way. And I think that's my ministry. That's my soul path. It's to be a bridge. I think exploring is a lot of what I do, and I investigate. I investigate all kinds of things. I go deep into it. But then what I'm able to do is take what's useful, take what's foundational, take what's universal, and then throw away the rest. Sometimes you don't need to throw anything away, but sometimes, yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff you might need to throw away. And I've given up on, ideas that I have, spent a lot of time in exploring, only to find that it wasn't the complete picture. And it's been many years of just learning that way. But I think the bridge between cultures is one thing, you know, like who's got the right um, worldview, right? I studied in the States, a liberal arts education. And in a liberal arts education, take something like cultural studies, cultural heritage. I remember that was one of the classes. Cultural heritage for us in college was uh, from the Greeks. The Greeks were the top dogs, right? In our discussions, the Greeks were the ones that introduced the most rich philosophy, foundational worldview, and I don't think we discuss much about the other side of the world. But yeah, that's how it is. That's that you're right. In America, it's 80% of people don't have passports, so you don't really travel around. And I think that's really sad because it's like I can't remember who made this statement, but travel and life. There's something about travel being so. If life is like a book,
I think it was
then
Augustine. I
yeah,
think.
maybe. But if life is like a book, then every when you travel or move, it's like you're living out a new chapter in this book. But if you just stay in one place, you don't really move, and the story doesn't really evolve. You
Hmm.
know. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think something that I've been exploring myself is coming back and trying to I wouldn't say assimilate, but just try to find my place in the states after being gone for about 11 years. Is that there's a very like straight like it's just like one line of like religious thought or political thought or social thought of like this is how things are.
Mhm.
And to your point, like if we're gonna worship Greek philosophers and like Western mindsets that are very left brain leaning, God, has given us two sides of our brain. So the right side of your brain is like the intuition, it's imagination, it's music, it's creativity. It's this side, the left being languages and mathematics and logic. And I'd say like to dumb down one side or favor one side would be crippling ourselves in
Yeah.
some sense. And when you look back through some meta narratives throughout the Old Testament, you see that there's stories within stories within stories that are happening, and if you just, from a Western perspective, to learn it is to memorize the information and be able to regurgitate that information, and that's not really learning a lesson. So if I burn my hand on the stove, and then I later tell you, like, yeah, I touched that stove and I burnt my hand, and I can regurgitate that, but I didn't learn, like, not to put my hand on the hot stove and why that stove gets hot in the first place and what should that stove even be used for. Outside of that, I'm not really learning. If I am learning, I'm learning in a very, very crippled way. And so the Western brain thinks, maybe like on a quantitative lens, and then the Eastern maybe is looking more at a as a qualitative lens. And so quantitative in the sense of I have seven apples on the table, and I'm gonna count like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then qualitative on the Eastern mind says I have 7 apples here, and I can use these to create apple pie, or I can create apple juice, or I can create applesauce from these things. So you're like, what can I do with these things? And so when you're telling a story from an Eastern perspective, and then a Western mind's trying to interpret through the Western lens, it's just over the head. You're not seeing like the whole picture there, for sure. And you popped out,
Yeah.
popped back in. I don't know if all that came through, but
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the gist of what you're saying, I mean, it's spot on to the pattern. So there's this idea, as above, so below, as within, so without, and this is a universal concept. Uh, you mentioned left brain and right brain, yeah, and there is a difference between these two hemispheres, like as you mentioned, right? One is actually designed for novelty, curiosity, and that's the right hemisphere. The side you mentioned is connected to music and all of that. It's also the side that we don't really speak with the right hemisphere. That's the left hemisphere's job. Um, the right hemisphere will speak in symbols, you know, visually. That's another weird thing about it. But you can see the difference between this bicameral situation, is that yin yang, masculine, feminine. You know, that's your right brain, left brain, and with the world, when you expand, as above, so below, and you can find this pattern everywhere. There is a masculine, and there is a feminine energy. And yeah, with the Western worldview, it's very much a masculine, um, yang kind of energy compared to the East, which is very feminine, very yin. Yeah, we're
yeah,
okay with the
and
mystery, even when it comes to like, the bigger questions, the bigger philosophical questions, the religious questions. They're very much okay with the mystery. Here in India, we're very okay with mystery. It's not the case with the West. You have to have the known. You have to have that known world, established, and that's the preferred state. And it's great because you can actually build stuff when you get to that point of knowing and certainty.
yeah, yeah. And I guess like looking at the trade-off of those two things though is like I know what I know what I don't know, but I don't know what I don't know, and people feel very insecure to just admit like I don't know. And me and my wife, there's actually like I guess like there's a practice in Judaism when they discover something they don't know, they do a dance and celebrate, and the mindset is like there's something more for me to learn. It's a celebratory thing. But like in the West, like you'll see like clickbait stuff where people will say something to somebody, then they don't know what to say, or they said the wrong thing or whatever, and people want to shame people for not knowing. And so it's kind of like you cripple people's attempt to learn. And like we live in like a time where I feel like we're coming out of it, but just like the whole cancel culture thing and all of that, of like people were afraid to talk, and when you're afraid to talk, you're afraid to think out loud. When you're afraid to think out loud, I can't even test my ideas and you know, throw them out to you, and you're like, oh Mike, it's actually not like this, and we kind of like can work on them. But I feel like there was an example given once that always stuck with me, but it was about North Korea and the Kim Jong Il. He asked the kids like, "What's 1 + 1?" And the kids said, "You have two, of course." And he said, "No, 1 + 1 is 1." And they're like, "Explain." And then he said, "If I have 1 drop of water and 1 drop of water, and I put them into a bucket, the water becomes 1 unit, one quantitatively. You didn't ask me like what I was adding together." And this kind of sums up like you know, think whatever you want about North Korea, but this kind of sums up like an Eastern take on it's qualitative versus quantitative. It sums up what I was explaining with the 7 apples. There.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So for you, like now, you know, jumping into a country that like has a like, I think Sanskrit, what is it, like 5,000, 6,000 years old? It's estimate, something like that. It's one of the oldest written forms of language you have. India has been like producing cotton for over 5,000 years. Like there's a lot of like industries that have existed in the place that you're residing longer. Like America is only a couple hundred years old as a country, and then you're in a place where like there's all these industries and all these like things that people have invested themselves in. How do you kind of navigate the layers of tradition and modernity, and like a lot of the art that you do, like there's a lot of digital art you do, and the way that you build, you know, I see that you're kind of like building business stuff. Like how do you not necessarily reconcile those things, but navigate those things?
Art, reconciling art with what?
No, just basically just tradition and the modernity. Like if you're embracing like what's already existing there, because you said like you kind of came to a place where you'll
yeah. So for me, like, so I you know, my preferred approach in the world is that of like a mystic, okay? And if I was born 200 years ago, I would probably, you know, be a monk or something. Like I really dig that kind of lifestyle, that ascetic lifestyle. Now, would you remind me of the question?
So I was just asking, how do you reconcile, you know, navigating tradition and modernity within India? Because you're coming in again. You study in the States. You've been in Canada. You've been to UAE, and now you're coming to Bangalore. So, yeah.
So I think, look, here's one way of putting it. The mystical approach to life is one of remembering, you know, through direct experience. You're trying to remember who you were. You're trying to remember truth. It's not about, and I know I mentioned exploring at the beginning. That's, it's exploration in a different way, you know. We say you got to go inward, you got to go within, but what it really means is everything that is inverse to how we're thinking when we're thinking just from ego perspective. So that mystical approach to life, you know, that means what I do as an artist, it's just what I'm digging up from the past, you know, and I do it in a very literal way as a collage artist. I work with public domain stuff, you know, and when I dig it up and I bring it back, it's a composite of many different works from different time periods, and but what it does is it gives a universal message, one that's stood the test of time. So I'll cover themes like, you know, death and rebirth, and you know, other mythological themes, you know, you can imagine. And we just talked about yin and yang and the masculine and the feminine. Those are universal concepts, and everything that I explore will touch upon that. So it is going back in time. Right? There's no issue with how do I reconcile things with the changing world. Foundational stuff is what I hold on to in my exploration. So, does that make sense?
Yeah. So and I think that kind of ties into what you said earlier. It's just like you look at for universal truths, like self-evident truths and things that have kind of stood the test of time. And if there's a narrative that's like 30,000 years older than written language, or like 6,000 years old, or whatever, like that, irregardless of generation, people are able to integrate that into their being. You can just pull
Yeah.
symbols and pull the imagery
Yeah.
to engage that right hemisphere of the brain.
Mm, mm,
You know,
mm.
you talked about being like you feel like you're a mystic. I think this is probably like a connection point between us, because this is really like where I
Yeah.
would I don't really fit within, I would say, like institutional circles of faith in some ways. I basically just had like they say I just had bad theology basically, but if I look through the corpus of the Bible, and I see that one of the ways that the creator of everything that exists wants to engage with people, interact with people, it's through visualization. It's outside of having like like there's a incarnation or a manifestation in the physical. A lot of times people are having visions or they're having dreams. And so when we talk about like your brain and how you're going to interpret information, one of the ways that Western people struggle a lot is they will want to sit down and have a really intellectually stimulating teaching, but they want to have something that they can. It's challenging enough to like it kind of stretches them, the neuroplasticity, but it's simple enough that they can walk away from that exchange and they can absorb it and they can regurgitate it back and like, look, I'm smarter for this. And then, some of the people who are minded like that will very much move away from anything that has to do with music or emotion. And so they'll kind of disdain, like, if people are playing music, and music really is a vehicle. Music, like, they'll hear certain songs and there'll be an element of nostalgia, but then you hear certain songs, it's like a vehicle to it activates you in a sense. Like, it's activating a part of you. And so people are like, oh, this is sensationalism or emotional, and I'll gravitate away. And so again, like having an openness to kind of marry those two sides, is that in the middle of your hemispheres, your brain's your pineal gland. That's the third eye, like what we see in these like kind of symbols. But that's I would say that's the projector screen in the mind. So if you'd say to somebody, close your eyes and imagine a Coca-Cola bottle on a hot beach, and you're sitting in your chair, they would immediately think about, is it glass, is it plastic, how do I picture it, and they would immediately picture condensation running down so they're activating those hemispheres of the brain. For people in the West, why that's really hard is because our school system worships, I shouldn't say worships, but heavily emphasizes the left brain function: reading, writing, arithmetic, those things. And then art, music, all these things are electives. They're non-essentials. And they've actually done brain scans of kids, and the left hemisphere of the brain will swell, and the right hemisphere of the brain will lag behind in growth. And they studied, Harvard tried to do a study of what it means to create geniuses or people who are very successful in business, and they completely abandoned the study. And the reason why they abandoned the study was because they connected genius, or people who are going to be successful in a sphere of life, to creativity, and creativity plummets the longer people are in Western education. Like, it literally was like everybody starts out in kindergarten, like 5, 6 years old, and it's like saying by the time after they get to the 13th year, only 2% of them have like that the threshold of whatever creativity they were talking about. So it's supposed to be like this big, like, multi-decade study. They abandoned it because they realized, like, we can't track this with such a small control group. But all that said, that's a long way of saying that when we talk about having dreams and having visions, if you had a dream, you came to me and said, Michael, I had this dream, and this and this and this happened. If I'm just like a left brain analytical person, I'm like, good for you, dude. What did you eat pizza before you went to bed? Like, what exactly? What do you want me to do with that? But people throughout the corpus of when you talk about mystics, they actually will make decisions out of what they're encountering in that state. And the same thing with like, and most people, if let me reframe, you look at like Albert Einstein or Isaac Newton, the theories that they had came to them in a flash, and they'll use different language about it, but it was actually spontaneous thought, which is a vision of sorts. Einstein's walking on the train platform. He turns around to look at the clock, and he looks back, and then that's when it clicks on his head. When he turned to see what time it was, the time had changed by the time it took him to look back. Isaac Newton, the theory of gravity, all that. So there is a space for it in the pragmaticism of Western life to solve problems and innovate and create. The problem with that is we're trying to commoditize mysticism, and we're trying to make it something that it's perverted in a sense, because it's about the inner man, and it's about transmutation and transcendence of the inner man. Those other things are peripheral. We can use it for that. But anyways, that's the only interest I've seen some people have, and it's like, oh, I can meditate and then figure out how to save my business $1.2 million. So
I mean, it would help if you were in that situation, right? Because I think as an artist, I can acknowledge one thing: we don't really discover. I mean, we don't invent anything. That's for sure. And I don't even think we discover, like when it comes to art. Some of it might be a discovery, but I think most of it, once you have your practice tip top, you begin to transmit, channel. I think that's more of what it is. So when people say I'm inspired, it's essentially, we're talking about the muse showing up. And so what is that muse? I think this actually leads us into a deeper topic, which I think people in the West should think about more. Like, it's not just you operating here. And even when you say inner man, that I love Carl Jung because he's like a bridge, from the West to the East. And he, even that's why Peterson also has an appeal for a lot of people out there. It's because he's bringing the world of Jung to the front, and he's saying, look, here's a framework for understanding and comprehending. And I think that's why we're even able to have this conversation right now. But channeling, Jung talked about active imagination, so that's a whole thing. The active imagination, his book, the Red Book, came from this process which he calls active imagination, which is essentially what prophets would do. They get in a trance state. People like Ezekiel, Jeremiah, dudes like that in the Bible. You've got Jung doing this, and he's an artist as well. So he's illustrated these visions, and he expands on the subconscious and the collective unconscious and all of these things. But it's both in and out. I think both are happening simultaneously. The reason why I mentioned the out is because these ideas don't just come from they don't just come from us. Like we have to channel. We have to tune in and channel. That tuning in part is difficult for most people because they get stuck in really crummy ways of thinking, and it really is not helpful. So if you want to be inspired and all of that, you got to be able to find your zen, your peace in that storm, because the muse, it's difficult for her to come down here, this density, this vibration. It's very difficult. And it's difficult living on in this material plane, bluntly put. It's difficult when we are not conscious of greater things around us. So there's a spectrum that we can visibly see, in the electromagnetic spectrum. But there's a whole lot more outside of that. Yeah, and the same goes for our hearing. There's a whole lot more outside of what we can hear. Our pets, they could be seeing angels and we don't even know. They could be seeing ET and we don't even know. We're really ignorant of most things. I mean, that's the truth. And so, yeah, people like Einstein, people like Newton, Newton was an alchemist, right? He was into the woo-woo, essentially, right? But I mean,
He was
I wouldn't
drinking
call it woo.
mercury.
I wouldn't call it woo-woo. I would call it the right way of thinking because you were talking about music not being an important subject, right? In the States and the arts and things like that. But without the arts, you don't have that. The imagination needs to exercise itself somehow. Like theater is important. I studied theater class for 2 years at Hope College, and it's again a framework for thinking, for storytelling, for your own life, because life is a stage. The world is a stage. We're all just players, as Shakespeare says. But you got to understand the mechanics of play on a stage, what it means to wear the persona, the mask, and understand as above, so below. So that the nature of God, the image of God, God's allowed to wear masks too, and God certainly does. You see, we accept that in this part of the world. It's hard to accept in the West. They want one thing, and the West really imported a more updated, modern form of world religion, which was this trend towards monotheism from polytheism. But yeah, when you go back in time, though, you understand that God is many things. That we come. When you think about God, you have to think about the soul. You have to think about why we think about God. It's because of soul. It's the knowledge of the eternal, that we come from the eternal. Eternal means you were there from the beginning, and you will be there in the end, and you will not be destroyed, right? Because you are eternal. So the great illusion, the Maya, is that, death is a real thing. Like there's something to be afraid of. The truth is that there's nothing to be afraid of. Yeah. But then in the West, at least with Christianity, you've got this, God's a very scary guy, and he's a jealous God, and he's gonna get very upset with you. And I mean, he's basically gonna act like a 5-year-old, and he might, but worse, he might do something very dangerous. He might put you in an eternal fire, and that's a horrifying thought, right? And yet we've adopted it, we've okayed it, yeah, and we've okayed it when we wonder why there are problems, why we don't feel correct inside. It's because these things do not align with the soul. They do not. We know better. But look, you can't question mom and dad. You can't question the minister, right? You can't question those you have told, you have publicly put trust in. It's difficult for people, at least. That's what I've discovered. Like, I mean, I have spent time in both sides of the camp. But it's difficult for people to switch. It's difficult for people to forget switch, just step outside of all of it and just see the bigger pattern behind everything. Because it really is just going to repeat itself. In this side of the world, we call it karma. It's something that would repeat. It's a pattern that keeps repeating until you stop, you sit with it, integrate, as Jung says, and that really means coming to peace with it. So what does that mean in simple terms? For the soul is here to learn. The soul is here to grow. The soul came here with purpose, right? We agreed to that before coming. You're tracking with me, yeah?
Yeah.
From the eternal perspective. When we get here, we have amnesia because there's no need to remember all of the past lives and, all of that. But we continue the journey here. In this life, there is a contract to fulfill. In this life, there are things to learn from our parents, there are things to learn from our friends, there's things to learn from We choose the circumstances of our birth as well, and who we are born to. That's a perspective that most people don't want to carry, because forget thinking about death and what happens after. People don't want to think about pre-birth and what happened before. you know so that's why they're just lost, right? They don't know, like, where home is, and yet we cry for home all the time, right? When somebody dies, we'll say they've gone home. Brother, they've gone home means what? Means you came from there. You know what home feels like, right? But you don't want to talk about it. You don't want a memento mori,
Hmm.
and that's the problem. Like, because if you just take that, if you just cross over to the other side, say you die and cross over to the other side, right? Like right now, Michael, you will find that there was nothing to be afraid of, because you don't die. Yeah, and you're not gonna burn up either. Are you gonna be judged? Sure, why not? You know, because on the other side, there is no contrast, right? You can remember all things, you can see all things, and not just from your perspective, from everyone's perspective. So you get to review your life. The Christians talk about a book of life. This side of the world, we talk about Akashic records, other things. But there's a record of everything essentially that has happened, that will happen. But yeah, you get a review, and then for your next round, you get to improve. You get to continue the learning, whatever it is that you want to do, or you get to rest. It's up to you, right? But we're down here living in the ultimate, simulation. It is literally the Matrix. We're here being our life energy is being sucked with this like 9 to 5 kind of slavery, right? I don't want to use these words because a lot of people are doing that. We all do. We're a part of the system, right? But it is what it is. The soul didn't come down here to just do that. Just please mom and dad. Just get married and have the 2.5 kids. Just do that 9 to 5 like a good boy. It's not why we came here. Yeah, I mean, part of the learning is to learn how to do that, to learn how to be a good member of society, learn how to cooperate, collaborate, all of that good stuff. But we're also meant to learn how to stand on our own feet, how to discover the light within, okay? Because there is really no other light that you can count on in this world, especially today's world. Now that might scare some people, because when I say find your light, they'll be like, yeah, but what about God's light? Well, if you find that light, you'll find that it is God's light. They're scared. They don't trust themselves the way God trusts us. God trusts His creation, her creation. Doesn't matter how we place God. Doesn't matter how we define God. But one thing's for sure: we come from unconditional love, and we get to experience on this side of the bridge. We get to experience what it means to be separated, what it means to be lost, okay? What it means to not have, right? On the other side, you got it all. You have to come here to experience all of this. And this is the only way the soul will grow, experientially. And it's a beautiful thing when you maintain that bigger perspective. It gives you a lot of peace. And look, you don't have to believe in past lives and reincarnation and all of that, because that's expanding maybe too far. You can just see this as this one life is what you got. In fact, the sage would say you must just look at the one day as one life, and that's all you have. Every day as that just one life, sun up to sundown, and then you do your best with that day. But what does that mean, doing your best? From the soul perspective, it means, well, everything that you experience that is painful, that is friction, right? That is a pain in your butt. You stop and you say, okay, what am I here to learn? Okay, because that friction, that pain was designed. It was pre-designed as part of the path for you to learn. Now, we get every day we get the pattern repeating. Okay, the same problems with our spouse, the same, issues with the work. All of these things will keep repeating, and the pain repeats until we deal with it. And dealing with it is, yeah, what am I here to learn? So the Jews, I mean the Kabbalists, they call this tikkun, which is soul correction, right? That the soul, before it came here, had already placed these challenges to remind you that you're here to grow and shape in a certain way, you know? So the soul essentially, so if we were to talk about the soul is a vessel, okay? But it's not just a vessel in a static sense. You have to think about it like a seed, okay? So keep these two metaphors in mind, right? A vessel is there to receive. You get to receive from the light, okay? But a vessel can only receive as much as it has a capacity for, okay? Now think about the seed. The seed is your vessel. The seed is the soul, okay? It is like the, at least the part of your soul that you can comprehend right now, okay? Because the soul is really, really big. Our vessel can't even contain the entirety of our soul, right? So our job here is to expand the vessel, right? But then also allow for more soul to come in. Yeah. And that's really what we're meant to do on the everyday, sun up to sundown. It's that. And any situation can allow us to move in that higher direction. So you'll be like, why is my boss being such a mean person to me today? Well, that's okay. It doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. If you want that whole thing to stop because it keeps coming up again and again, there is a way. Well, yeah, most people, unfortunately, yeah, they don't want the simplicity of it, right? Because I just talked about Kabbalah, and that's from the, that was Abraham's religion, right? That was Adam's religion. It's like that was Yeshua's. I wouldn't say religion because it's not really religion, right? It's a system, mechanics of the universe. But who was privy to that information? Not everybody. The common man does not get that information. Today we have access to this information, and you can empower yourself with that knowledge. But even then, it's really difficult to read some of these books. you
Yeah.
know?
Well, I think like there's like an overlap on some ideas, and then there's like a reframing of ideas. So if you talk about karma and like that whole thing,
Yeah.
I think from biblical perspective, you're just going to talk about generational curses. That there's going to be a
Oh
pattern that's just
yeah,
going to keep
yeah, that's
happening over
right.
and over
Oh,
and
that's
over,
that's true. They
and
do
then
talk about. I think that's a good. I didn't think
yeah,
about that. Yeah.
and then when you talk about reincarnation and like the afterlife, like there's ideas that have been adopted, that basically like, an idea just keeps condensing down on itself, and then we arrive at this conclusion as if it's always been like this. And so I had this conversation before about, you mentioned like the Jews. So the Jews had this kind of ambiguous relationship with the afterlife, and they would talk about there's Sheol, which is the place where like it's a collective kind of thinking, not individual thinking, but it's just like, oh, okay, dead people are kind of there. And then there's this idea that emerged of Gehenna, which is like a geographical location outside of Israel, but like they kind of came up with this concept of basically what the Catholics would call purgatory. So basically, normally it's about 12 months. If you're a real bad person, sometimes it'd be extended out, but it's basically kind of a cleansing of the soul, like post-mortem. We're gonna, God is gonna have to deal with you before you move on
Mm.
with the collective there. And so how did those ideas carry over? Well, those ideas carried over, and like the Catholics adopted this idea of purgatory, which is Gehenna, and then they adopted this idea of heaven and hell.
No,
So
no one
where?
needs to adopt. I think that's one way of looking at it, but it's like overcomplicating it
Well,
because
that's what I'm saying. Is like they
it
start.
pops up all
You,
over the world. Like even
you,
right now, people's view of the other side,
mhm.
each person's experience is going to be different. So I'm talking about people that have actually crossed over, like near-death experiencers. you know. So there's a lot of those guys. Now, what they see and what they experience on the other side, whether is Jesus Christ or an archon or a bodhisattva or their family members or their ancestors, depends on the framework that they accepted when they were alive. That's the deal.
Yeah. If I was going to be like a devil's advocate
Yeah.
here, like argue the point, I'd say that the brain was flooded with DMT, from the traumatic brain, or
Yeah,
from where
I
you're
mean
getting
that's
there to death,
possible.
and you're having this experience. My only point there was that I was just trying to like kind of walk through like where these ideas emerge, because you threw out a lot of things there,
Mm,
and so the idea you reference eternal punishment, and
mm,
then and then there's an idea of basically destruction, and there's another
yeah.
idea of universal atonement. And so these three ideas were kind of played with in the early church. Augustine is the one who popularized eternal punishment. That if you don't make the right decision in this life, then post mortem you're going to go to a place that's going to be real unpleasant for you forever, and there's just no recourse there. In Asia Minor, they had this idea that for some people you were just so bad that your eternal essence was snuffed out, that your spirit, soul, is just your consciousness ceases to exist, which that's the definition of death, is cease to exist, which that's not real, because to your point, we are eternal beings, and because we're coming from the source, and if I come from the source, then I'm going to share some of the qualities or all the qualities of the source. And so the idea of universal atonement was that, which this is more sort of the side that I lean into, is that Jesus said, when I be lifted up, I'm going to draw all men to me. When we read that it was the Lamb that was crucified before the foundations of the world, what does that mean? That means outside of time, space, and matter, something has happened, and we can point to in time, space, and matter when that thing happened. And so there's a place where somebody is, God becomes a human, is crucified and resurrects from the dead. That happened in time, space, and matter, but that happened outside of time, space, and matter. And so we're happening inside of time, space, and matter, but we've happened outside of time, space, and matter. That's how he's able to say that I have drawn all men to me. And that's why Paul says, I've been co-crucified. The life I now live, I no longer exist. It's Christ that lives in me, because I've become unified with this person. We become Siamese twins, or more than that. And so universal atonement leans on the idea that whether you want it or not, like it or not, believe it or not, you've been unified with the creator of everything that exists. But from C.S. Lewis's perspective was that there's a book that he wrote called The Great Divorce. And in The Great Divorce, it was an allegory where people could be in hell as a geographical place and a state of being where you have the choice to be there. Yes,
Yeah.
unconditional love is pointed towards you, but there's a bus that came every day and went into hell, and it went up to heaven every single day, and there was nothing prohibit you of going farther into heaven to be with God. But people would find, like, he had all these avatars, character archetypes, that they would find the reason to get back on the bus and go back down. And he makes a very solid point of, if I am the guy having this human experience and I have wrong belief systems about what this human experience is, he's like, if I don't understand that I live forever, if I'm going to choose to be bitter towards you, Johnny, you do something wrong to me, and I don't forgive you, and I want to have vengeance on you, and I start to become bitter and jealous or envious or whatever. If I only live, from a Western standpoint, if I only live for like 50, 60, 70 years, we know we can quantify that I can develop arthritis in my bones. I can literally have heart problems. There's actually a Japanese, the Japanese figure this out. They call it broken heart syndrome. And literally, if people have a lot of stress or whatever, like there's a kind of heart condition. I know this because my mom went through this. That's called broken heart syndrome. So we know that the things that weigh on the soul and the spirit can have a physical impact on the body. But if I'm only living for 70 years, my life doesn't have that much meaning or purpose, and it doesn't really matter if I be bitter for 70 years. I feel this physical. Now, if I live for 1,000,000 years, or let's say I live forever, but like in 1,000,000 years, imagine quantitatively that compounding over 1,000,000 years of bitterness, 1,000,000 years of vengeance, 1,000,000 years, and that literally becomes hell. That's what Lewis pointed to, is that'll become your state of being, but your geographical location. And in that book, The Great Divorce, people who chose to be there, they didn't like other people, and so like you could see houses way farther out, and that's where Hitler was, and like wherever people, because they just so much hated people, and they, God in the creation story had a series of benedictions. He created the earth and the heavens is good. He separated the light and the dark, it's good. Animals, it's good, 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 good. And the last thing that he said after the benedictions that he cursed is, it's not good for man to be alone. It's not good for man to be alone. We're actually meant to be within relationship with each other. We're supposed to have common union, communion with each other and with God. And that was the whole point of universal atonement, is to reconcile, which means to break separation, restore relationship between humanity and itself and the creator of everything that exists. That was the point there. And to break separations means you have to stop dispute. And to stop dispute means you have to engage with these things that we're talking about. And so from Lewis's perspective, hell is God's final granting of man's wish to be left alone, not God is in a courtroom as the gatekeeper per se. Now I know that some people that'll be counterculture, but I would just say this is that when if I'm looking from a Christian perspective, when Jesus comes onto the scene, it's a minority viewpoint. Everything he's saying, everything he's teaching, Christians say, oh, this is the truth. It was a minority viewpoint at the time. It was viewed as a cult. It was anti-Judaism at the time. And then it gained traction and built. And so there's an assumption that Augustine's perspective, because it was a majority viewpoint of eternal punishment, is what should be adopted readily, because the masses decided to agree with it. And my perspective is that nobody really knows post-mortem what we're dealing with there, but I think that there is some like overlap on ideas. I think probably where the rub happens, where the buck stops, the hinge point of everything is when I had this conversation is when we start talking about overlap of ideas, is like, was there actually a person named Jesus who actually lived on this earth, who actually was the incarnation of God, who actually died on a cross, who actually resurrected the dead, literally, not figuratively, that actually happened? And if that actually happened, then we have like two different kind of perspectives to hold. One is that, well, if that actually happened, then I do have some kind of moral responsibility to enforce that. If it never happened, or I don't know if it happened, I can take that standpoint, but I have somewhat of a moral responsibility.
It definitely happened. I don't know why people keep debating on whether or not Yeshua he existed.
Well, not the existence, but the resurrection is probably the point.
Everything. I mean, why do people see it as so impossible? I mean, this goes back to what we were talking about. People, they have no concept of anything beyond just the material experience. They don't even give it a chance. And like Jesus, there's okay.
Sorry, I threw a bunch of stuff at you.
Quite a bit, but I think I want to just touch upon. You mentioned Sheol, right? You mentioned the different groups and the debates on the afterlife, even among the Jews. And at the time of Jesus, you had three of these groups, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and those two debated amongst themselves. And then you had these these outliers, but the Essenes, where John the Baptist comes from, Jesus comes from there, Yeshua comes from there. And the Essenes, if you look at their framework, they're the ones that introduced baptism, for starters. They never believed in ritual sacrifice. Okay, so they were always living on the fringes because they did not believe in animal sacrifice, right? And a lot of their texts, you can find that some of these texts are written a couple hundred years before Jesus enters the scene. So Jesus is not all that unique in terms of saying something so radical, and out there. He was still a very respected man who spoke in wisdom and stature and had favor with God and men. You remember that, right? He had the respect with those in the Sanhedrin. It's just that, he was an Essene. And those boys, they were right about some stuff, but no one wanted to, ever you didn't want to remove sacrifices from the thing because there was a lot of money there, right? Jesus is using that whip in the temple because, yeah, because like, dude, they had made a whole racket out of it, and but this wasn't like it was a new thing. The Essenes were they saw that as a problem right from the get, you know. So this is a really old story with those people, but I think the people that choose to follow like Abraham's religion, like and call it Christianity, they
What
argue over this the things that I don't know, you're not even meant to argue over. Like it's
what
just
what was the you mentioned this word uh before, but that was the one part that I left out. Was there was Sheol, there was this Gehenna, and then the world that is to come, uh, Taktulum or something like this. I'm butchering the word, but it's the world that is to come, and that's what you're entering into. There's like these three kind of pools or buckets, uh, there, and I find it quite interesting. Like one thing I do find interesting when we talk about reincarnation and this idea of, and you said we're living in a simulation, is they say like, okay, you're going to be in the afterlife, you're going to be given a new mind, a new body. And I always think about like role playing video games, because when I start a role playing video game, I just create this avatar and I can make it look how I want or whatever, and I just get dropped into this digital world and I'm just kind of roaming around this world. By consciousness is controlling this thing, but I can plop into other worlds, and so there's like layers of dimensions that you can just kind of move through. So we see these buckets that they're talking about, like Sheol, Gehenna, not, I can't remember the word. Um, and so that idea of like being plopped in a different bucket of an experience, like of okay, now I'm a dog this time, now I'm this stuff, this whatever. It doesn't outright. I don't know. I just find it interesting. Like post mortem, we get plopped into another meat bag, or if
yeah,
like for
you choose the
or
human, right? You'd
maybe
pick
a silicon based life form or something. I don't know, but
See, you'd probably pick your meat bag, and yeah, it might be a dog in one life because you're gonna learn a lot from being a dog. You'd learn a lot from being a female dog. In the same way, there's a lot you'd learn from being, a male human and a female human. There's a lot that you're gonna learn from being a Caucasian human or a person of some other Asian, right? It's all the same thing. At the end of the day, the meat bag, as you rightly put it, is just a vessel for the soul. And like that's like I keep going back to that because that is the only perspective worth carrying. And like the debates about is there a heaven, is there a hell? Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, like everything you manifest everything, right? Like including the hell. Okay, and it is an eternal place because when you're there, if you've been to hell, right? Like and you can talk to some people who've dealt with addiction, you've dealt with mental health issues, and other things like that. There's some hellish experiences that you can have, and it definitely feels like an eternity. But when you get out of it, it's like wow, it feels like a miracle, doesn't it? And it feels like some hand stretched down and pulled you out of that. Sometimes that's the only way you can get out of that. And so that again, that's that idea, that Christian idea of the Redeemer and the Savior. But it's not just a Christian idea, I mentioned Bodhisattva earlier. That's the Buddhist term for a savior. So an ascended master who's already crossed over doesn't need to come back, but they come back to do exactly what Yeshua did. To them, it's not like it's a big deal. It's like they still do it today. You've got the Dalai Lama. In fact, I'm wearing this thing is from the Dalai Lama. Got it. A friend of mine got it from Rishikesh. But that Tibetan Book of the Dead, when talking about the journey of the soul, right? Well, for them, they know the time and the place when an ascended master is going to sort of reincarnate, and they've got questions and cues and props which this child will select, and they will know that the ascended master has reincarnated into the body of that child. That's how they do it. It's very, very cool how they do it, but it's very normal. Again, it's how much of the container, the perspective do you want to hold, right? Because
is it in Tibet where they do the sky funerals?
Yeah, they do that. They do that, and that the Zoroastrians I know do that, right? The Parsis, they do that, the sky funeral. So, yeah, a vulture, they're gonna eat your flesh.
Yeah, they just leave you up
Yeah,
there to be consumed and back into the circle of life. You hear Elton
yeah,
John singing in the background.
yeah. Would you prefer to be buried or cremated or
I think cremated, but it's
yeah?
like, I think it's just very like pragmatic. Of like, I think like the funeral industry within the states is a racket. I think it's crazy that you pay, you know, 12, 15,000 plus dollars to like lay somebody to rest in your family, and
Mm.
they'll kind of leverage your grief of like, oh, Michael, Johnny was your friend, and you want to do right by Johnny, don't you? And get him this platinum coated casket here and the gravestone. I mean, he really likes Star Wars, Michael. It's just a couple $100 more, but we want to put that Millennium Falcon on the back of that gravestone to honor Johnny, don't we? I'm not saying they're all like that. I'm just saying like I just find like it's pretty straightforward if you're cremated and then it's done. But there's a lot of like alternative methods of came. Like there was one scam that came
What do
out
you
where
think
those
happens?
people.
What do you think happens when you die? Because you said that you think it's just DMT that's flooding the brain.
I didn't say that. I said I was playing devil's advocate of what like somebody who's
I kind
yeah.
of wanna. Well, I kind of wanna. You can't just like I wanna play devil's advocate and not let me respond to
Okay.
that
Okay.
because you know. So the DMT thing, huh? Uh, that's that's fair. Okay, DMT is gonna give you a trip. Okay, but this is not the same kind of a trip. These near-death experience stories are not. They're not spoken of in the same way as a trip. There's more lucidity and clarity in these experiences, and those who've experienced it will often say it was more real than real life. It wasn't a trip. In fact, they were outside of their body, many of them, and they're able to see. This is when they're completely unconscious, brain dead. They're able to see who's operating on them, they're able to hear conversations, and they're able to recall after they've come back who was doing what, saying what, right? That's weird, right? And there's more, like, so the life reviews and things like that, they get insight into parts of their life that, they just are completely blind to, right? They're getting instruction about their future, and they're coming back changed people. These are not people that uh, are quite the same. They all have very, very, very similar testimonies. Basically, yeah, there is another side. There is a sort of a judgment, but they don't use that word. It's like review, okay? Because you get to see everything that you've done, but not just from your perspective, from the perspective of the other person. Someone that you so if you've done something good for someone, and you didn't even know how big of a deal that was, you get to experience what that was like. How your words change someone else's life, day, whatever. But if you hurt someone, you get to see what that does as well. So then it makes sense that you'd want to kind of come back and get a redo. But yeah, most people that come back, they don't even want to come back because it's so damn good on the other side. It's like
Well, I've heard conflicting. I mean, like you say, like people have similar experiences. Like
I
I'd
said
say, like
most. I said most.
yeah.
Now there are
So
people that have had hellish experiences, but it's a
yeah.
very very small percentage, maybe around 5%. Okay, but I can talk more about that if you're curious about that because we did discuss hell. So as an experience on the other side, it does exist. How people get out of that and how because when they are able to come back, right? They came back to tell the story. So how they got out of hell is there's a common thread to that, and it's that they don't do it on their own. They don't walk out of it on their own. They don't have a key in their pocket to open the door. It's not like that. They essentially surrender, and then something comes to get them. Whether it's Jesus Christ or Mother Mary or whatever it is another figure that is pulling them out of that. And yeah, but many people don't experience that. So like a lot of atheists that have that experience, they don't go through a hell necessarily because they just don't even have that framework. They've not accepted, and they might not see like saints or angelic beings. They'll see like It could be other versions of themselves. It could be ancestors. It'll be whatever they're cool with. So that's another thing, because what it teaches us is that the imagination is very important. The stories and the myth that you allow to make up your worldview and framework is super important. It affects how we operate in the world in the day to day, and it
Yeah.
apparently affects what happens on the other side, at least how we perceive things on the other side.
Yeah. So like Carl Jung was kind of pointing to, like, if you, I'm going to paraphrase, but basically if you came up with the concept of Mickey Mouse and I came up with the concept of Bugs Bunny, that like Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse actually exist somewhere in another dimension, like as actual entities, like me and you thought them up and they're actually in that other dimension, like
Because we
interfacing.
brought them up,
Yeah,
they
and
have
there's a
to.
collective of consciousness basically where ideas just kind of get dumped into, and one thing that you mentioned earlier was, and what they, and I'm not nuanced on this. I just heard it in passing in a podcast, but they talked about that in one part of the world there'll be a group of monkeys and they will learn how to do something or they'll be doing something, and then on the entire other side of the world they've never interacted with each other, but they'll start exhibiting like a certain like kind of behavior, and it's happened with rats and it's happened with other kinds of animals. I don't remember the word for it, but it's a phenomenon within science that they're trying now to understand on like how that's happening, but it would for me kind of point to a collective consciousness that like even though they're not interacting or like overlapping in a geographical space, they're still able to pull from that. And when we talk about creativity and art, I would say like most of the time, and I don't want to diminish anything that people have done, but I'd say, and even in innovation, most of the time what's happening is you're synthesizing a what has already been, versus like you're actually reaching out into the ethos, into something that never has existed and pulling it in. I think it can happen very rarely. Most people are not that kind of creative. Most people are synthesizers where they can like take things and like take a collective of things and then change it into something. And same thing with innovation is it's just like stacking ideas on like the previous idea. You're not really creating, you're creating something new, but it's like you're innovating on the ideas of other people, if that makes sense. But I think,
Can I
anyways, I have,
can I add
go,
to that perspective?
run for it.
Actually, I think
I have,
like the collective
we're 3 minutes.
unconscious. Yeah, the massive ideas. You've got monkeys on two sides of the world that are growing in the same way, right? Well, I want to add this, that even for human beings, it would happen in the same way, even if we were not globalized. And that's how it kind of happened throughout history.
They,
Even
they
when
found that though. That was
yeah,
the connection point they were making.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so I'm gonna just leave you with this: the world of astrology, right? And how we evolve over eons, we shape shift over eons. Okay, and there's a time and a season for everything to happen. The 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 human story kind of follows the astrological narrative. Okay, the journey of the stars is the journey of us, and it continues. And and yeah, I think there is a time for change when it does happen, when the monkey kind of shifts. And I think it happens. There's a collective unconscious upgrade, and then there's also external environmental factors that will influence the change as well.
I'll try to find it for the next podcast that we do. I'll find out like what it actually is, and I'll send it to you so we can kind of like unpack it, because it was, I wasn't explaining it great, but it was like nuanced of like they were exhibiting something that's just they've never interacted. It's something like
Yeah.
random there. And when you talk about astrology, just to clarify for people who are listening, you're talking about the actual study of like the stars. You're not talking about horoscopes. You're talking about like,
I am talking about horoscopes as well.
well, all right. Well, that's a conversation another time. I think horoscopes, but I think astrology is like real because
Well,
they use the
horoscopes
star to
are
find Jesus.
horoscopes. I mean, look, they're called transits, and then you can actually figure out your own future. You don't have to look at it from some fortune cookie kind of perspective. It's quite a vast subject, and if you do give it a chance, you will find that, especially if you're kind of on the mystical side of things. I mean, do remember that Jesus was discovered by
A
the wise
star, yeah.
men, the
But that's what I was saying.
so
That's a study
astrologer.
of like
Joseph,
astrology.
Joseph knew his astrology as well. He was the right hand of the pharaoh. So I mean, and the Kabbalah, astrology, the tropical zodiac, contemporary astrology today, a lot of it is borrowed from Kabbalah. Okay, and that's the Judeo-Christian history includes that. So I wouldn't just throw the baby out with the bathwater here. There's
Yeah,
something.
what I'm talking about is like in the newspaper they like give out like
Yeah, yeah, that's
horoscopes.
based on your sun sign. So there's actually a whole
Uh,
lot more than just the sun that
but
influences you.
and they did it, why I
There's
say is
moon,
like
there's a rising sign, there's all of
they
the planets.
they did a controlled study and they like gave like people all the same horoscope and like 85% of people said, "Oh yeah, that's me," but
Mm.
they're all like completely different there. But dude, I have a meeting that I have to hop for, but appreciate you jumping on and unpack. We have a lot of stuff to unpack. Move forward,
We'll
and
continue this in a part two and part three.
yeah, yeah. I love you, dude. Thanks for making the time. Appreciate you.
Yeah, this is fun.
Yeah. All right.
All right,
Take care.
take care. Bye.
Bye bye.